if you're doing follow the money work, with terrorist financing in 2010 to 12, Bitcoin was just an unbelievable revelation. We would talk about it almost every day of what does this mean? Like, should we be tracking it more? Like, is it being used? And it's easy now in 2023 to understand, to look back on it. But in the moment, we just had no idea what was going to happen to it. Like, it was a tiny little thing. Today, I would say that Bitcoin is the most traceable money in the world. At the time, it wasn't clear how the on-ramps and off-ramps would work and, if it would be traceable or not. But looking back, Bitcoin to me is the most traceable money in the world, but it's also to me the best money.
All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Shaun here with me. Shaun, I thought a great place to start is you as a civilian worked with DARPA and you both went to Afghanistan for a number of months. You guys were investigating Bitcoin. There's all kinds of different technologies that very, very early on DARPA was interested in. Describe a little bit what is DARPA and how did you get involved with that organization?
Oh, this is a good one. How much time we got for this one?
As much time as you need.
All right, this is a crazy story. But so what is DARPA? DARPA is the research arm of the Department of Defense. In the past, the way DARPA has operated is we'll set a vision of there's some technology pain point or technology need, and we'll then go create a program. And what that means is there'll be a program manager that, for example, DARPA created the internet. It wasn't Al Gore. It was DARPA. And the way that happened is basically it's kind of realized by some people at DARPA and in other places that there are all these computers getting built. We had to network them together so that you could share resources, share printers, which were really expensive at the time, and just have them talk to each other. DARPA doesn't build the technology, though, historically. DARPA just comes up with the idea, manages it, and has the money. And so in the case of ARPANET, which was the precursor to the internet, came up with the idea, or at least managed the program, and then puts out what's called a solicitation for proposals, where hundreds of people will apply, hundreds of groups. And then the program manager is kind of like a DJ, where they'll say, hey, I think UCLA is the best at the networking side of this. And this other group is best at building the firmware that would go on a early router. And so, and the program manager is also in charge of kind of building in redundancy in case one group doesn't perform. And so they'll usually they'll kind of break the problem, say, designing an early internet into maybe 4 or 5 sub pieces and choose 2 to 4 groups to build each of those. But DARPA created the internet, stealth technology, kind of precursor to GPS. mRNA vaccines are very controversial these days, but DARPA had a big role to play in that, basically of giving Moderna a bunch of money when it was kind of an undiscovered company around 2012. On and on, can list 50 plus technologies created by DARPA. For myself, I have a very weird background in every way. I'll get this out of the table. I got an F in Algebra 2 in high school. I'm very proud of that. It's one of my proudest accomplishments. It's a good story. But I was just a weird kid. I was hacking on computers and building stuff, just kind of doing my own thing. But a lot of my family was actually in the military. Both of my grandfathers served in the military. My dad's dad, all 3 of his brothers served in the military. 2 of them died in World War II. One of my dad's brothers was a career naval officer. When I was a kid, he was a doctor. And when I was a kid, he was the doctor that ran Pendleton Hospital, where the SEALs train. And so my cousins lived on the base. And then he went and ran Walter Reed Hospital, or Bethesda Naval. That goes by 2 names. And so my cousins lived on that base. And so a lot of Americans grew up with no exposure to the military. I grew up, if I wanted to see my cousins who lived an hour away from us, we would drive down and go on the base. And then my mom's dad, he was also a former Navy guy. And so he and I would go ride bicycles around Pendleton. And it's just kind of I had a lot of exposure. And as a kid, I actually really wanted to enlist. That was something that I thought very seriously about. But with the F in Algebra 2 and kind of like a really bad track record at 18, if you enlist in, say, the Navy, and I mean, my goal would have been to try to become a SEAL. That was kind of my dream growing up around Pendleton. If you don't make it, if you wash out for whatever reason, if you have even weird things, like if you have a heart arrhythmia that you didn't know about, then you kind of get put into the normal enlisted ranks, and you will struggle to find someone that's worse at taking orders than me. Like I'm pretty good in chaotic, unstructured situations. I'm absolutely horrible with structure. And, I'm embarrassed I didn't have the self-confidence to, go do it and like shoot my shot. But I was genuinely really nervous about kind of not making it. But so for myself, I had, from time as a kid, I had this like ambition to go serve my country and kind of be in the military. But I ended up, despite the F in Algebra 2, I ended up getting a PhD in math. And I mean, technically it was in the physics department, but it started in the math department. And kind of while I was doing my PhD, started at Stanford, and then I was at Caltech. Through a total fluke, is like out of a movie, I met this woman. Her name is Regina Dugan. She was the director of DARPA at the time. She's an unbelievable person. She's one of the people in the world that means the most to me. I don't talk to her that much anymore, but Regina, like you're the GOAT. I appreciate you. And there was like a Caltech lunch that she gave a talk at. There were probably 25 people in the room. A girl said something stupid. It kind of led to an awkward situation. I jumped in. I kind of stood out for it. At the end, she was really busy, and she stopped in the doorway and she said, "If any of you want to get involved in it," she stopped in the doorway, but she looked me right in the eye. And she said, "If any of you want to get involved in a DARPA project, find my contact information online and get in touch with me." And, I was like, was she talking to me? Like the director of DARPA? But I found her contact information. I sent her an email at like 9 p.m. that night. I was staying in like a little youth hostel in DC. She responded. I mean, I have the emails, but I think it was 4:44 in the morning. Like she's a beast. And she said, "Yes, I was talking to you. What's your cell phone number? I'm going to call you later." She called me around 10 a.m. and she basically asked if I could go to DARPA immediately and meet with a few people. I was supposed to fly to Panama, like literally at 2:30 p.m. or something. It's 10 a.m. and I was in Bethesda, Maryland at the NIH. And she was asking me to go to Arlington, Virginia. For any of you that know DC geography, it's an hour away or whatever. And then I had to get to Dulles Airport. And if I didn't make it, I would miss my friend in Panama. And for what it's worth, El Salvador goes into that story if we want to get there later. But so I actually initially said, no, I can't make it, hung up the phone. A minute later, I just had this deep, deep pit in my stomach of I was closing a door on like, oh, truly once in a lifetime opportunity. I could just kind of hear her voice deflate, and she said that she would have me do some phone calls with people, but I just called her back. I just redialed the number. She picked up. I was like, "I'm on my way. I'll be there as fast as I can." I got there. I joined a very unique program. It's like basically something that DARPA hasn't really ever done. Normally, DARPA doesn't build technology. Normally, DARPA just like builds technology for 20 years in the future. But she realized when she came in, she basically went and asked a bunch of generals, like people at the Joint Chiefs, is DARPA actually useful? And the reaction she got was DARPA is useful 20 years in the future. Like DARPA is useful for the next war, but it's not useful for the current wars. And at the time, things were still very active in Afghanistan in particular. And to her, she felt like that was unacceptable. And so she decided to spin up kind of a live operational team inside of DARPA that was actually building technology, like fast prototyping based on needs, or gluing existing technologies together that could be deployed very rapidly. And And there were really like 10 of us that were the core kind of architects and drivers here, and then some people that helped support us. But part of this is we'd be rotating in and out of Afghanistan because it's just really hard to know what to build if you're not actually on the ground and seeing the gaps and what people need. And so she recruited me for that program. I mean, like within 3 hours of meeting her of meeting people at DARPA, I had an early smartphone. I didn't have an iPhone yet. This is in 2009. And I got an email like saying, when could you be in DC? I was literally sitting on a plane to Panama at the time at like 2:30. I made the flight. And I responded like, I'll be there in 8 days, because I basically went to Panama, met my friend. This was like winter break during our PhDs in 2009. And this is my friend, Jeff Marlowe, shout out Jeff. And we basically rode buses from Panama City to Yucatan Peninsula. So, through all the countries there, including through El Salvador. And that was just very fast. We're crazy masochists. So it was like, call it one long bus ride a day. We made it through, call it 8 countries in 8 days. And then I moved to DC with my backpack and spent 2 years living out of backpack, doing crazy shit.
Obviously, there's a bunch of stuff that you guys do that you can't talk about. But when you're doing these rotations into Afghanistan, it reminds me a lot of maybe Elon Musk talking about, hey, the engineers got to be right next to the production line, right? The designers need to be right next to the engineers. Like there has to be that feedback loop and understanding what's working, what's not working, and what your design decisions actually have in terms of implications. What are some of the things that you guys would do on the ground to actually get that feedback to really understand what to build and maybe what not to build?
Amazing question. I mean, there's just no substitute for talking to lots and lots of people that are like actually just coming back from combat and they have an immediate memory of some problem or pain point, or just literally moving around the country. Like I don't remember exactly how many Black Hawk flights I did while I was there, but probably 30, in 3.5 months. I would just go kind of and like rode in cars around, like seeing stuff happening every day almost. And just the act of moving and talking to people, it just completely changed your perspective. I'll give you an incredibly simple, stupid example. I had a lot of data sets. One of the data sets was around IED stuff. That's basically all I should say. But one of the variables in there was like, this was a massive data set, and one of the columns was called culvert. I didn't know what a culvert was, so I just kind of ignored that like column. Culverts are kind of like when you have storm drainage under a road, wherever, it's like what the water flows through. And I mean, I'm very embarrassed that I didn't, maybe it's my poor high school education, but I didn't know what that was. And it turns out it's incredibly important for finding IEDs, because you don't have to dig up the road. If there's a culvert under, someone can just crawl into the culvert and put an IED down there. And, if you're going to if you're like sitting in DC looking at a data set and, there's hundreds of columns in it, it's just sometimes hard. And this was pretty deep learning. And so still a lot of this was like human intuition based, and we called it statistical learning rather than, these black box neural nets. And so things like that, so powerful. But I mean, another example was I was basically, I had kind of a schedule where a couple of days a week I would go from this one base to another base. And that was about an 1.5 hour drive. Normally it was only maybe 5 miles, but there was insane traffic. And I would do it a few days a week, and I would do it every Friday. Normally it would take an 1.5 hours. This one Friday, we got there in like 15 minutes. There was literally no car on the road. It was eerie. It was so scary. And we get to the base, and the base was HQ ISAF. It was like the primary base for the joint command of kind of all the different allied nations that were all the allied Western nations that were deployed there. And right when we got there, we went to like all the intel channels to try to understand, is there like, is there an attack coming or what's happening? And there wasn't any clear, like, obviously there's always a lot of noise, but there wasn't anything clear. And then a few hours later, like a large combined attack happened, coordinated attack, across like multiple bases, rockets into towers and stuff. And it's just one of these things where the context of like, oh wow, when somehow people knew, and that having no cars having like the car traffic decrease was clearly predictive that something was going to happen, and maybe not 100% of the time, but things like that, it's just, if you're not there, it's hard to have the context that's relevant. But when you're there, it's just the most obvious thing in the world. You have a routine, and now you just had this major break from your routine. And so, I mean, I could give lots of examples. The best examples are, ones I can't talk about, but I don't know.
What's interesting about it is it's like the human intelligence, right? Obviously is incredibly powerful. And one of the things that over 20 years, of kind of dealing with insurgencies and these like forever wars, it seems like people on the ground really started to understand that you can have all the best technology in the world. You can have, all of the vehicles that can sustain, explosives. You can do all sorts of data analysis. You can have the best kind of trained teams. Literally, the difference between life and death could be like, does the guy on the street corner like you enough to simply tell you, don't go down that road? Right.
Well, and that's the difference. And that happens it's such a good point. Like that happens all the time. I just want to call it one thing that I glossed over. Part of why I gave those examples is I was working on this from 2010 to 2012 primarily. And that was the very early days of like big data. It was the very, very, very beginning. And so we kind of had a mandate to work with any type of technology, but the thing where we got the most leverage at that moment in time was kind of big data, trying to take all these data sets or sensor systems, whatever, that had never really been analyzed. And so that's why I gave those examples. And the other thing I just want to say is, hopefully from the preamble around like having a lot of family that served, it's not that I'm so special or anything, but there's something about when you are deployed in uniform and you have like a job and everyone else's life depends on you doing that job very well, and you're working like 14 hours a day in super stressful situation, it's hard for your mind to like go come up with new ideas, or sometimes even to like see the patterns that are like should be obvious, but are just not obvious when you're so stressed and so focused on a single task. And so we had this weird mandate to just kind of go be observers almost, but like very, very technical observers that were aware of what technologies existed and what was possible, and just kind of go be glue to fit in there. It's like, I think it was literally a genius idea of Dr. Dugan. And it was a life-changing thing for me.
While you were at DARPA, obviously 2010 to 2012 is right after Bitcoin is created and kind of launched to the world. I know that DARPA and a number of other organizations pretty quickly started to pay attention to this thing. What do you remember from that time period of just like, what were people thinking internally? Were they excited? Were they not? I know there was research going on around it. Just talk a little bit as to kind of what that experience was.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy to be at DARPA in the early days, to be at DARPA embedded in Afghanistan during this time, because one of the core things we were doing was especially from the perspective of big data, was a lot of follow the money work. So like trying to understand how money gets in and out of the country, trying to reverse engineer the chain of shell companies and figure out like sources of where money's coming from. It was a major thing we were doing. And, I think at least 4 or 5 things we did made the front page of the New York Times. I'm very, very proud of that. So we were actually successful at this. And if you're doing follow the money work, with terrorist financing in 2010 to 12, Bitcoin was just like an unbelievable revelation. We would talk about it almost every day of what does this mean? Like, should we be tracking it more? Like, is it being used? And it's easy now in 2023 to like understand, to look back on it. But in the moment, we just had no idea what was going to happen to it. Like, it was a tiny little thing. But it was very disruptive. It wasn't. Now, today, I would say that Bitcoin is the most traceable money in the world. At the time, it wasn't clear like how the on-ramps and off-ramps would work, and if it would be traceable or not. But looking back, like, Bitcoin to me is the most traceable money in the world. But it's also, to me, the best money. I am a mega Bitcoin fan. But it was just truly a core part of what we were doing. And then leaving DARPA, immediately from there, myself and two friends we basically decided to start a research company that was doing DARPA research. So we kind of were getting contracts from DARPA to do AI research, big data research, cybersecurity research. And about a year and a half later, we brought in another person who came up with a really smart idea that became like our product, which became the whole business. And in like late 2013, that idea actually used Bitcoin. Like, we were using Bitcoin. It's kind of a long story, but we needed to do computation that no one would be able to trace back to us, and we were using Bitcoin to basically pay like Estonian and some like Baltic server companies to go kind of run compute jobs for us, which then would get pushed on the internet. And as crazy as it sounds, we actually needed to do that back then. And the architecture evolved beyond that after maybe 6 months. But anyways, we were using it.
And what was the idea in terms of like what were you guys trying to do? And I know that this business ended up growing quite large, and you guys eventually were able to sell it. But what was the original idea that you guys said, hey, look, let's turn this into a product?
This episode is brought to you by Auradine. They are a brand new startup led by a number of Silicon Valley legends who just raised $81 million to build the future of internet infrastructure. You're probably wondering what that means, so let me explain. There are numerous new disruptive technologies that are being adopted simultaneously, from blockchain to artificial intelligence to zero-knowledge technologies. In order to ensure that these technologies thrive in this new world, we need new infrastructure, and that is where Auradine comes in. They just launched their first product line called Teraflux, which is a Bitcoin miner powered by the world's first 4-nanometer silicon chip technology. These air-cooled, single-phase and dual-phase immersion cooling miners have unrivaled speed and efficiency. They have superior uptime, and they leverage a brand new innovation called Energy Tune that allows miners to dynamically adjust the energy consumption and Bitcoin hash rate based on demand response needs of the electrical grids. Auradine is an ambitious company working on hard problems. I'm really impressed with them. And if you want to check out more, you can go to auradine.com. That's AURADINE.com. Go check them out at auradine.com today.
Yeah. So the original idea or the observation was that if you go back to 2012, 2013, if you ask basically any company or government agency, what is your network? Like, give me a list of all of the computer devices you own. Give me a list of all of the video cameras, the servers, the like routers. Just give me a list of all of the devices that you own. Believe it or not, no one had those lists. Like, no one had a map of their own assets on the internet. And if you're going to defend something, like, you need to have a map before you can defend it. I have so many crazy examples of, like servers that had been running for 30, 40 years that were like put inside drywall that people still didn't know existed anymore. And so basically that was the insight. I was not the one that came up with that insight. One of my co-founders did, to give them credit. but it was such an obvious insight to us once we had it based on what we'd been doing. And so we decided, okay, this is a super important problem. Cybersecurity is going to be huge. Like, let's go solve this problem. And so now this is a kind of a category in cybersecurity called attack surface management, is what it got named later on. And so the way we solved this, kind of the insight that another co-founder had, like one had the idea of what the product should be, the other had the idea of how to build the technology, and I basically sold it and, executed on it and hired a lot of the team. But my co-founder kind of realized that in 2012, we'd just gotten to the point where you could use big data ideas and send packets to literally every single device on the internet, like to every single device and on a regular cadence, like every hour or so, and see what responses you get back. And like through kind of what we call fingerprinting, you could figure out what those devices were. And so we started off by building a superset of every single device on the public internet. If something was behind a properly configured firewall, then, or if it was on a blacklist or whitelist of what we weren't supposed to send packets to, then we wouldn't touch it. But otherwise, we knew everything on the internet. And then from there, we would try to figure out from the superset of everything, who owns what. Does Goldman Sachs own this? Does JP Morgan own this? Does the Navy own this? And so we kind of would start from the top and then segment everything. And part of why we needed Bitcoin is we were sending so much internet volume that if people knew that all the packets were coming from us, like if we were sending from the same server infrastructure, then they could just ban any packets from those servers going to them. And so we wanted to have like server infrastructure that wouldn't be traceable to us and that we could kind of move around so that people wouldn't realize that we were kind of effectively like a very light DDoS, but kind of a DDoS.
How much you guys sell the company for?
$1 billion. And it's funny, it was publicly reported as a little less than that. And it's kind of, I don't even know why, but the acquirer wanted to report it as less. And so they didn't include basically, so it was $1 billion and $50 million, $1.05 billion to the cap table. So like to investors or any employees that were no longer there. But they didn't include in the announced number, like the revested equity for the people that were continuing, or not just revested equity, just any equity that had been granted but not yet fully vested. And so anyways, that was a discrepancy.
Yeah, it's interesting how they kind of think about that. Another thing is you've tweeted a bunch of times about Nayib Bukele down in El Salvador, and I think that he obviously is implementing a pretty radical plan. Radical just being different, right? Not necessarily good or bad. The impact so far, or the results, seem to be pretty encouraging. There's obviously some people who have concerns about, kind of the style or the concerns in terms of what could potentially be used as abuse of power. But so far, it looks like he is drastically stomping down on criminal activity. He seems to be cleaning up a lot of corruption, and then it looks like citizens basically are headed towards a better life, right? One that has more freedom, more prosperity, et cetera. What has been your experience? I know you've gone to the country a bunch of times and seem to have studied, what he's doing. What's your read on what's going on there?
So I've been to El Salvador, I think 5 times, and I've traveled it pretty extensively. Like I've taken buses from the south to the north. I've been to the volcanoes. I've been to the beaches, San Salvador, etc. And I have a few friends there that I kind of still get to check in with and see how things are going. And it's weird. The first time I went there, I fell in love with the country. It was super dangerous. I think the first time I went was 2007, and it was super dangerous at the time. And when you would talk to, my friend had security at their house, like you could feel MS-13's presence. And look, I've been really impressed by Bukele today. Like I've been blown away by him today. I think that he inherited a horrendous situation. I mean, you can go look at the murder rates in the country 10 years ago compared to today. And it's kind of like he inherited a trauma patient that had been shot like 4 times and was bleeding out. And he had to take like really radical, kind of risky action to stabilize the patient. And I think he's done that masterfully. There's still a question around the future. So I think he's done the stabilization step incredibly well. We don't know exactly where it'll go in the future. But so far, what I've seen from Bukele has been just like incredible nuance, like huge bravery, willing to look stupid in the short run to be vindicated in the long run, which I think very few politicians are willing to do these days. So I hope that's actually an example for other politicians, that sometimes, like he looked really stupid when he bought Bitcoin and the price went down, but now he has a 93% approval rating. And, he's just, I've been really impressed by him. I've been very impressed by his nuanced views on things and kind of the risk-taking and the ability to try to engage the technology community. So I don't know where it'll go, but I've been really impressed so far.
When you think about a politician like that, how much do you think age plays into it? Like, obviously, El Salvador seems to be like the exact opposite of the United States. And one of the things a number of friends and I have been talking about is just like, no matter how innovative you want to be, no matter how, refreshed thinking you want to be, age does play a role, right? And especially if you are then not only yourself getting older, but then you're surrounded by older people as well. I think one thing that venture capitalists figured out very early on is like hang out with young people, right? And like that's where the fresh ideas are. That's where kind of innovation comes from. I really don't know, right? Maybe politicians are spending time with a bunch of young people. It doesn't strike me that way. But Bukele seems to be, well, obviously one, he's younger, but also two is the average age in some of these developing nations tends to be younger as well. And so do you think that actually plays a huge role, or is that something that like we want to kind of put it into a box and explain it, but maybe isn't as impactful as we would think?
Personally, I think it plays a big role. The nuanced view though is I think you kind of want all age groups kind of all together. I think that we are today, American politics is just skewed way too old. Like the median age is probably 15 to 20 years too old. But, the thing that old people bring is huge amounts of experience and like the wisdom that comes with that. The thing that young people bring is fresh eyes, work ethic, energy, being closer to the technology changes that are happening, and just like understanding the voice of a different cohort of people because they're much closer to it. And so I just, to me, if I could wave a magic wand and, lower our American, say, Congresses or the House or the Senate's median age by 15 to 20 years, I think that would be hugely impactful. But it's not to say that we don't have some phenomenal, elderly politicians.
Let's talk SpaceX. Obviously, I think people are very excited. It's been 20 plus years since the company was started. I think that you've invested like $1 billion in the business. SpaceX is known for rockets. Starlink is becoming a much bigger story. They recently announced direct to cell, which is an entire concept of like screw the carriers, screw everybody else. Like we're just going to go straight from the satellite to your cell phone. How do you think about that business and like maybe what the potential outcomes could be, both in terms of size but also importance in the world?
Oh man, SpaceX gets my fire going. I mean, it's just such an incredible company, and I just want to call out from the beginning, one of the things about getting to be a little bit close to the company is you see the work ethic of the team. And man, part of the beauty of having such an exciting mission that's so clearly stated and that it is for many people existential, I think a lot of people do view going to Mars as a kind of a really important thing for humanity. And so just like the work ethic and sense of purpose in that company is unreal. I've never seen anything like it. And despite what the media wants to say, like it starts from Elon. Like that guy is it's incredible how hard he works. I'm 37 and I couldn't even come close to keeping up with the number of hours he works. It's insane. And so I don't want to take any credit for what the team is doing or whatever. I'm very lucky to kind of get to be a fly on the wall and make some money from it, but I don't want to take any credit. For myself and for Sequoia, we haven't really talked about this. It's not a secret, but yeah, we've invested about $1 billion into the company. The largest investment was in July 2020. So this was kind of when Starlink was like you could do the earliest demos of the constellation, but it was right before they had any revenue. And so kind of we saw the inflection that was going to come as they were able to convert this 20 years of potential energy, of building like this insane launch platform, and now start launching secondary, like very kind of profitable mass consumer businesses on top of it. Some of the things that I think are just unbelievable. Last year the company put, and Elon's tweeted the numbers, something like 65% of all the world's mass to orbit. So if you look at all of the mass from every space program globally, that's both private and public, including the Chinese space program. Last year, SpaceX was about 65%. This year, it's going to be like 75 or 80%, in 2023. SpaceX has not had that many really major inflection points in its history. But the company's kind of right at arguably the biggest in its history. And so even those numbers, like 75, 80% of the world's mass to orbit in 3 years, when Starship is like really, really working and is flying, 100 times a year. I mean, the numbers are going to be really crazy. And so, the things I would keep in mind about the company are, it took 20 years to kind of build the system that can make the system, and to kind of get the company to a very stable, strong place. And now we're just at the very beginning of converting that kind of stored up potential energy to kinetic energy, which will be seen as like revenue, profits, just mass scale activity. The company's, Starlink obviously still has lots of new markets to launch into. That I don't want to say anything that they haven't shared. Like, they announced direct to sell 2 days ago. What that means is like the initial thing is basically for any of their global cellular partners. So like T-Mobile was one of the first in the US. If you're a T-Mobile customer, you'll be able to, I think, I shouldn't go into the exact details on like how the plans work or whatever, but if you're a T-Mobile customer, you'll be able to get a Starlink add-on, which will give you no dead zones. So like if you're hiking, if you're, driving and there's a dead zone, the network will just kind of automatically spill over from the T-Mobile network to space. Like literally your cell service is going to come from space. It's pretty sweet.
It's basically like having a consumer-friendly sat phone, right? Like a satellite phone. It is kind of the sense that I get in terms of what I was reading.
That's true, but look, for me, it's more like cell towers in space. If you in the past, part of why like satellite internet and all that has a bad reputation is in the past, basically all the satellites lived really far away from Earth. They lived, I think it's a factor of 1,000 higher orbit than where Starlink satellites live. The round trip time for a signal to go to one of these satellites and back was about a second. And so you have, latency. There's a lot of loss of like the kind of the energy in the beam as it's going that long distance. And so like the total bandwidth that you can get to the ground is not that great. With Starlink, people will rewrite history, but 4 or 5 years ago, people didn't think it was possible to when I did diligence on the company, almost every expert I talked to said it's not possible to have, broadband internet from space at a mass scale where like lots of people can be using it and really, fully power rural environments and have as much bandwidth as they need. Here, I think it's the way I would think about it is it's really like spoofing cell towers in space. It's really just kind of lifting some of the ground infrastructure into space. And it's low enough, on the order of between 400 and 600 kilometers above the Earth that, you're really not that far away. As crazy as that sounds, like it's really just, it's almost right above us.
Yeah. To me, I think that's what becomes really interesting is almost Elon's learning from Tesla of vertical integration. And, a lot of people, I don't think really understand how many of the parts they make in house and how they've been able to simplify supply chains. And just, the more you learn about it, I think you're just like, wow, that's really hard, very complex. But obviously, if you can pull it off, it's super successful. It feels like almost in a weird way, he is now vertically integrating. Hey, if I can get things into space, what are all the use cases of things that I could do up there? And Starlink seems like a pretty good place to start, but I gotta guess that he is considering, what else could he be doing?
They are. I'm just, I want to be sensitive to, I don't want to step on anyone's toes. But I do want to say my mental model for both Tesla and SpaceX is they're each 20 companies in one. Like for Tesla, obviously they make cars. First of all, the thing that I was negative on Tesla like 7 years ago. And it was just a stupid, naive argument that all the hedge fund people had, which was, if you add up the market cap of all the automakers, like Tesla's doesn't even make anything yet and it's already bigger. The thing I got wrong, because I'm actually on the board of a LiDAR company called Luminar that is selling into the automotive industry. The thing I didn't appreciate back then is that the OEMs today, like they don't make that much. They basically buy almost all of their parts from a large supply chain. Like for example, there's a public company called NXP that makes semiconductors for cars. There's like a company called Aptiv that does a lot like the wire harnessing. So they kind of like harness up all the electric cables, and a lot of that's manual. And there's all these sub companies, many of which are like large companies. There's also the gas stations. Like there's this whole thing. A lot of people are looking at just, the OEMs today basically just sell cars, do the financing and like a little bit of the design. They don't make many of the pieces. Tesla is making almost everything. It's literally 20 companies in one. They're making semiconductors. They're making the batteries. They're even gonna like refine lithium. They have the gas stations through the charging network. They have autonomous vehicles. They have like the software, the control systems for the cars. It's just they make like the speakers for the car. Which is on and on and on. It's 20 plus companies that also has all this potential upside through things like self-driving, things like Optimus, the robots that we're seeing. And so I just had the wrong mental model for the company. And Tesla and SpaceX is very similar to me. Obviously the rocket is the core thing. That's the workhorse. But to make the rockets, there's so many different subcomponents. But even to make satellites, like with Starlink, they make the engines that power the satellites. So when satellites are, when people talk about space debris, in the orbits where Starlinks live, call it below 600 kilometers, there's actually still some atmosphere. There's a little bit of atmosphere up there. And so when these satellites are flying, they're actually colliding into, atmosphere molecules, whether it's oxygen or, carbon dioxide or whatever it is. They're colliding into these molecules. And every time that the satellite collides into one, it slows it down a little bit. And that would cause it to start descending to Earth. It would cause it to fall into Earth's gravity well and ultimately burn up. And so to keep these things in orbit, like with space debris, if you're below 600 kilometers or whatever, where Starlink lives, if you turn off your engine, you will within a couple of years just fall into the atmosphere and burn up, including all the debris. If God forbid one would break or there was a collision. But so for example, like they make these engines that power the satellites. And so they're making the phased array antennas that like go into the Starlink user terminals. So it's really just unbelievable. And I think people have the wrong mental model for just how impressive these companies are.
How do you guys at Sequoia or just yourself think about some of these new technologies, right? So obviously SpaceX and Tesla, I think, have become these household names. Obviously Elon, very well known for doing some of this stuff, but you are literally in the business of going and finding the next SpaceXs, the next Teslas. And so like, what are the areas that you're looking for? How do you guys think about, trying to underwrite like, hey, maybe there's innovation happening, but like, is it going to be commercialized? Is there actually a business opportunity here, or is it more of a research project? Just talk through maybe some of the things that you've learned over time and kind of what that process looks like.
Yeah. So Sequoia is a partnership, and it's kind of, this may sound crazy, but the way I would describe it is it's a bunch of people that are simultaneously, we're simultaneously a bunch of individuals that are all very, very different from each other and have very different investment styles, investment interests. But we're also like simultaneously an incredible team that like really tries to push each other's thinking and really tries to work together and really tries to help each other whenever it's needed. And we've almost constructed our team the way you would construct a portfolio. Like, to have a good portfolio, you want a lot of diversification in the portfolio. If you were going to have a portfolio that's 100% AI companies in the year 2021, then, or in the year 2023 or whatever it is, like, you're so heavily indexed just what happens to AI in that vintage that you don't really control what happens as much as just the macro environment. And so like for us, we think a lot about portfolio management. And so that means you want some companies there's like max risk, really swinging for the fences. You want some companies that are like relatively straightforward. It's a software company that's already working, and maybe the market is capped, but like we're high confidence that it will get to some level. And so we construct both our portfolio and our team with this kind of similar lens of trying to have a very diverse collection of people. And so we all have really different investment styles and interests. I'm one of the people on the furthest extreme, if not the furthest extreme, of like, I'm kind of a swing for the fences investor. And the way I do that is I like to, there's like two pieces to it. One is I just try to study all the markets in the world, like all the large markets. If there's a market that has more than $100 billion worth of revenue flowing in it, like I want to know that market. I want to understand that market. And just like already have a prepared mind on how it works. So I hold the markets in one side of my brain. And then the other side, I'm always looking for changes in the world. Like, what are the why now? So like maybe there's some new regulation that just got passed, or maybe there was just some major, major failure somewhere, or, you have decoupling of, China manufacturing and US manufacturing, or I'm just always looking for kind of the intersection of really large markets that I've already thought about a bunch, and then some new why now, whether it's a new technology or regulation or whatever. And kind of that intersection is, I think, when you get the biggest opportunities. Like that's when you have the swing for the fences opportunities where you might have the first time ever credible path to go, create a space internet constellation, or like last night I had dinner with one of my founders, Ali Amin Javaheri from Node, KNOWD. This is a chemicals marketplace. Most people don't know anything about the chemicals industry. I'm obsessed with the chemicals industry. There's $5 trillion a year of chemicals sold. That's about 5 times bigger than pharmaceutical industry. It's bigger than oil and gas, but no one knows about this industry. It's just kind of like goes over people's heads. And so I had studied that industry for like 15 years, just out of curiosity. And then when I met this brilliant founder that had this kind of crazy insight, and he was coming from the industry, I had enough of a prepared mind to realize that that might actually work. And that might actually let you go kind of become a large player in this gigantic industry. So that's how I think about it.
When you meet these founders, whether it's this founder you're talking about with the chemicals marketplace or others, what are the traits of great founders, right? It's interesting because you've been doing this for a while now. Sequoia's obviously been doing this for decades and probably has a bunch of institutional knowledge of just like higher probability of successful founder, lower probability. What are some of the things that you all are looking for or try to tease out when you meet founders?
number one is probably grit. So it's people that are just never going to give up. Every single startup is hard and has major like trauma that happens. And, if you find a founder that will never give up, they're like, if on average, every startup has 4 major trauma moments, if you find a founder that will never give up compared to a founder who's like 50% likely to give up at any one of those 4 traumatic moments, then it's like 16-1 more likely that the gritty founder succeeds simply because they didn't ever give up, probabilistically. So I think that's number one is the grit. And, there's a lot of things that can signal grit in someone's background. Immigrants are oftentimes have more grit. It takes a lot to pick up wherever you are and like go take a risk, leave your family and go start somewhere new. People that have had trauma in their lives oftentimes have more grit, but it's something that's really important. And so number 2 is speed. And it's really not, it's not even about like IQ. It's about just like email response time. It's about, time to take a risk, just like ship a new product feature and see what happens. To me, Elon is probably the best in the world at speed. It's one of his many advantages, and he's willing to just like test products in public, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but he gets that data incredibly fast and then can kind of move on. Number 3, I would say is, and this is not going to be popular, but this is like, I'd say street smarts or judgment. They're kind of the same thing to me. Like I'd much rather work with a founder that has incredible judgment, just to kind of always gets the right answer, rather than someone who, has really high IQ and just kind of is really book smart. I think street smarts are more important in business than book smarts.
How do you tease that out, right? So I think that makes sense. And, you kind of look at it as, hey, I'm betting on this person. Everything's going to change around them. They're going to have to really make good decisions to get us where we need to go. But when you are meeting with someone, even if you meet with them, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 times before you invest, how do you decide whether someone's a good decision maker or not?
Amazing question. It's just kind of an art form. It's kind of a skill. Like, I think I'm not perfect at it, but I think I'm better than most at assessing other people's judgment. But I do have tricks for how I do it. Like probably the biggest one is I rarely invest in people that I've only known for, call it, less than a month. I like to know people for at least 3 months and really watch them operate a little bit, see if they do what they say they're going to do, see if they kind of chose the right strategy. As the small number of kind of problems arise, you usually don't have like a major problem in those 3 months, but small things arise and you see how they react to it, see like what decisions they make there. And so, look, I think simultaneously, if I'm being honest, I think I'm just better naturally at assessing judgment, and I get that from my mom. But then the other part is just kind of watching people.
And so as you begin to work with these people, right, what do you see them doing in terms of building company culture that kind of sets it apart, right? So we talked a little bit about Elon and just its speed. If you read Walter Isaacson's new book about him, there's some crazy stuff that they're doing there, right? Literally just like the surges and getting people to believe in this big mission. What are some of the things that you all have seen in your portfolio companies where, you've already made the investment, you already kind of believe in the founder, but you begin to have a deeper conviction, like this was a good bet, and we can see the early signs that this company's going to be one of the companies that breaks out?
Judgment is certainly one of them, which, companies are faced with crucible decisions all the time, not that many, but call it 1 or 2 a year. A lot of times there's different magnitudes of crucible decisions. And, it can be like someone gives you an acquisition offer. Do you decide to take it or not? It can be, your business is, we had a plan and it's going pretty well, but then something happens and it's kind of like not working anymore, and you should probably pivot your business a little bit, not like a big pivot, but change like the pricing, or maybe a new competitor enters and they have a free product and like it kills your top of funnel of new customers, and you have to make a change there. And so I would just say, you can just tell an incredible amount from how founders respond to these early kind of like strategic decisions. Another thing that's funny is a lot of the best founders, there's like a balance. The best founders, you don't want to be too first principles thinking. You don't want to reinvent absolutely everything. But the best founders do reinvent some things. Like there are some things where they're really stubborn and they'll just do something, Steve Jobs or Elon. Obviously, there's certain things where they're just like so dead set on they have some vision or they believe something to be true. And a lot of the best founders just have that stubbornness, but then they have to be willing to change their mind when they get data showing that the original kind of vision was wrong. And so for myself, one of the things I do with the founders I work with is I try to explain how confident I am in any given advice. Like, I think that, people ask me for feedback on stuff all the time. And usually I don't know anything about it. And it's like, sure, I'll give you my opinion, but like, don't take my opinion seriously. You do you, it's your business, more. But for every company I'm with, there's probably like one or two things a year where it's like, I have extremely strong opinion. Like, I have been through exactly this 2 or 3 times before. And, and it's oftentimes non-obvious things, but like, you need to hire your first sales rep right now because you are getting product market fit right now. You don't realize it yet. And your plan was to hire your first sales rep in 6 months, but like, you need to hire him right now or her because it's going to take them a couple months to get ramped. And like, you want to be able to service that demand when it comes in. And it's all levels of this, but there's only 2 or 3 times a year, 1 or 2 times a year per company where like, I actually have a strong opinion for them. And I try to make it clear when it's a strong opinion versus just like pulling stuff out of thin air.
People always laugh. I say all the time, whenever giving advice, free unsolicited advice, just remember, you kind of get what you pay for. And so, here's my advice. And one, it gets a good laugh, but also two, just, don't put too much weight on it. Because I do think that it's hard to remember, like somebody else has all the information, right? Like they were in the room, they saw the eyebrow raise. They got the sense of, same when you were talking about driving through Afghanistan, there's no cars on the road. It's hard to describe to someone, but like, you just know something's up. So that makes sense. The last thing I wanted to ask before I let you go is Sequoia, given that you have so many partners, such diverse kind of backgrounds and strategies and all this stuff, how do you guys make decisions?
Good question. Pomp, you're a smart guy. One of the things about Sequoia, there's a meta point here, which is we're always evolving. Like Sequoia, part of how we've stayed such a successful firm is we're super paranoid. We're never complacent. We're always willing to take risk. Like, we view that if we are not willing to change or take risks, then like, we're just going to lose. And so, as crazy as it sounds, like even the decision-making changes a lot. Like, I've only been at Sequoia for 4.5 years, but I've seen the decision-making change kind of meaningfully at different points. But I would say some of the core principles are, one, we really try to have like ultra direct, honest conversations. Like, there's no sacred cows, there's no egos. You should not take anything personally. If someone thinks your company or a company is not working or is a bad investment or whatever, like you kind of, initially when I joined, like I took it very personally, but then over time you kind of learn that no, really, this is like feedback is love. This is like really just radically direct discussion. So I'd say that's point one. Point two is we really try to change who has an important voice based on what the conversation is. So like if it's a hardware company, my voice is pretty important. If it's a fintech company or a payments company, Rulof's voice is very important. He was the CFO at PayPal and on the board of Block, for example. Or if it's like an operations business, Alfred's voice is incredibly important. He was the COO at Zappos and at Amazon and works with Airbnb and DoorDash. He just has so much experience there. And with marketplaces, if it's a AI company, Constantine or Sonia or Pat's voices are really important. So it kind of just depends, kind of weight someone's voice based on what the conversation is, but not based on age or seniority. Like there's some times where it's like the 23-year-old analyst who actually knows the most about something, and we need to actually be able to elevate them and listen to them. And then the last thing I would say is everyone has veto ability over every investment, which is kind of crazy. And one of the things that leads to is it means there's like a few aspects of it. One is it forces us to make to have really intense conversations, and it kind of gives people the ability to block things if they truly don't think it's a good investment. But it also means like once we make an investment, if we make an investment, it means that everyone waived their veto, which means that now it is a team investment. Like there's no looking back in 3 years and saying that, oh man, like Shaun made that stupid investment. What a moron. Like we should fire Shaun. It's kind of the opposite. It's like, no, you didn't veto it. Shaun made the investment. He is a moron, but you didn't veto it. So you're a moron too. And so it's not that we should fire Shaun. It's that, and maybe they should, but it's just like, this is a team investment. Let's figure out how to make the most of it. Let's work together. Let's not relitigate the past. And so I think that's the kind of the really important, non-obvious part of having veto.
And I guess as a follow-up to this, like there's a social dynamic obviously at play, and there's also this like, whose voice is more important. How do you use maybe check size to also signal confidence, right? Or is it something where, hey, we want to put, the same check size into every single seed company, and if we can do that, then that's like better for portfolio construction?
We do have we definitely have some guidelines of what we aim for and what are like the normal strike zones for different type of companies. And we do have different decision makers. So like Sequoia is structured, we have an early team and a growth team. The early team is primarily seed and A. The growth team is, primarily call it $25 million investments and up. And so it's literally a different set of decision makers. In reality, there's actually a lot of cross flow. Like there's a lot of people from the growth team that sponsor investments for the early team, or vice versa. Like I'm on the early team, but I led our SpaceX investment, which is one of, if not the biggest investment. It's one of the two biggest investments in the history of like Sequoia, US and Europe. And so there really is like a lot of this back and forth. And it's very fluid. Like we at Sequoia, we really try to we have guidelines, but we simultaneously try to stay very fluid so that we can make good decisions.
That makes sense. Where can we send people to find you on the internet?
Well, my Twitter's pretty spicy right now, so you can send them to my Twitter, at Shaun M. Maguire, or you can, my email is smaguire@sequoiacap.com. And it's on the website. And I think those are my two residents. And when I say Twitter, I should have said X. Apologies, X team. Still getting my head around it.
I laugh every time I read a mainstream media article, and they're like, X, formerly known as Twitter. Like they're gonna do that for like 3 years. So you're perfectly fine. Shaun,
I think they might do forever. Who knows?
No, it's possible. I appreciate taking time to do this. I learned a ton. I think a lot of people will find this very interesting as well. So we'll definitely have to do it again in the future.
Pomp, you are a legend. I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.